Welcome to Stags and Media with SGHB. I'm your host, Sophia Gabriella Haber. In this series, I'm sitting down with inspiring Fairfield alumni who have found success in the media industry. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with the Vice President of Strategic Sales at Next League, Joe Whelan, class of 2003. At Fairfield, he majored in management and was a part of the Division I men's hockey team when that was a thing here at Fairfield. He stays connected with Fairfield through the College of Arts and Sciences Media Industry Council as a board member. So I'm so happy to have you and sit down with you today. We got to meet at Bloomberg when the students got to come to the Media Advisory Board meeting. So it's nice to see you again and get to chat.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you and excited for today, for sure.
Yeah. And you just have such an inspiring career journey. I'm sure that your words and your advice and your experience will be great for students to hear, because a lot of students are interested in getting into something that you were. So I want to hear from the beginning, why did you decide to major in what you majored in, and what were your passions when you were young?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, I was a management major here in the business school at Toles Business School at Fairfield. Didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I was an athlete here. As you mentioned, I played hockey here at Fairfield back when they had a Division I program. Always knew I wanted to be involved in sports in some fashion. The business side of sports is really where I wanted to be. I kind of thought I'd be an agent for a while in my career and then kind of shifted. But, I really always had a passion in sports. So I was lucky enough to get an internship in sports, in the sports marketing side of the house while I was still here at Fairfield. And then really I've just parlayed that into multiple jobs within the sports field over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, that's cool. So when's the youngest you remember watching sports, or when were you interested, or when did you start playing hockey too?
Well, I started playing hockey about 3 years old, which was great. My older brother played as well, so the two of us, he actually played in college. We both played against each other in college, which was great. But I started playing really young, played a lot of sports growing up, played every sport. I try to encourage my kids to play as many sports as they can. I think that's a helpful thing to learn, just life lessons and teamwork and how to be friends with different groups of people. So played a lot of sports growing up and, didn't know I'd make a career out of it. Always hoped I'd make a professional career out of it, as most naive young athletes probably do. But then, coming into school here, learning a lot about the business of sports, the business of media, and I was a management major, like I mentioned. So kind of learned a little bit of everything under management. And then I realized, there's jobs in sports and there's careers in sports and there's careers in media that I could do. And that's, where it really triggered me to make a move, make an adjustment.
Yeah, that's great. And what was your experience at Fairfield like? Did you enjoy it? And what was it like?
Yeah, Fairfield's great, right? It's different now. This past weekend, there was just SantaCon that didn't exist when I was here. So I live here in town. I live about a mile from campus. And, things are a lot different than they were 20 plus years ago. But Really enjoyed my time here, made a lot of lifelong friends. The business school has been rebuilt and moved up campus a little bit. So we didn't have this state-of-the-art brand new building when I was here. But at the same time, really enjoyed the business school aspect. Had half my classes or so in the College of Arts and Sciences and then the other half in the business school, and really enjoyed my time here. It was great to be an athlete on campus as well as be a student on campus, and made a lot of lifelong friends, like I said.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting because you live in Fairfield, you probably know much more than other alumni who moved away and they're not so connected to the campus anymore. So yeah, that's nice. Even the fact you knew it was SantaCon,
Well, you can't avoid it when you live here in town. But
true,
yes,
definitely.
I moved away for almost 20 years. I lived in Manhattan for about 18 years. And then we wound up here about 3 years ago in 2021. We moved back to town. So Fairfield wasn't the reason we moved back to town, but it's kind of a nice addition. I bring the kids. I've got 2 young kids, and I bring them to sporting events on campus and basketball games and lacrosse games and things like that. So, and I've got my kids doing the sports camps on campus. So, it's nice to be back near campus for sure.
Yeah, that's nice. And can you remember some of your favorite memories, specifically that you could share, a little story about being on the hockey team or something that really stood out to you? You look back on nowadays and you're like, oh, I reminisce.
Yeah, the hockey memories are some of my favorite memories on campus. We were a relatively newly Division I team when I came to school here, and we had 16 freshmen on the team. So I was one of 16 freshmen that joined, and they kind of revamped the whole team to try to restructure the whole team. But our freshman year, we were the worst Division I team in the country. So we were 3-28-3. So it was a rebuilding time. We had a lot of success my sophomore and junior year, which was nice. But my freshman year was a whirlwind, right? When you're winning 3 games out of 34 games for a season, it's a tough go. So with that, you've got to be light and loose, and you make a lot of friends along the way, and you've got to take the positive as much as you can when you're a struggling team. But we had a lot of fun, and like I said, a lot of lifelong friends from being teammates as well as just from on campus. But the school support was great too when we were here. We had a lot of kids come out and students come out to watch our games, and we played in a really terrible rink my first couple of years over in Bridgeport, and then probably the worst Division I rink in college hockey, and then we eventually moved over to the Haber Center, the arena there up on I-95, and had a little bit better experience playing there. But a lot of fun playing hockey here, and like I said, we saw our struggles, but then we also had some success as time went on.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense that they decided to get rid of the D1 aspect of it. They still have the team though, but it's club now. But yeah, it's interesting to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, it was actually 10 games left in my senior year when we found out they were dropping the program. So for me, it didn't impact my 4 years here, but it did impact some of the underclassmen who had to transfer out and go play elsewhere. But still unfortunate that they haven't found a way to bring it back 20 years later. I know they've had a lot of changes on campus, and they built a new arena. We were kind of all hoping they would bring back the hockey program when they built the arena, but different priorities for different regimes on the campus.
Yeah, makes sense. And where did you live when you were on campus? Do you remember from your freshman to your senior year?
Yeah, so freshman year I lived in Dolan, which is its own experience, right? You live up on the other part of campus and kind of away from everyone else, but that made it very unique to be on campus and have to commute, if you will, to class. So I think all of my closest friends from college are who were in my dorm freshman year in Dolan, and I think that's a cool experience when you're up there. You're kind of on an island with other people, not with other people. Sophomore year, I lived in Regis, in the main part of campus, and then junior and senior year, because of hockey, we were not allowed to live down at the beach, so we lived in townhouses on campus. I was in, I think 105, which is right off the center field on the baseball field, and then I was 151 or 155 towards the back corner. So, 2 years in townhouses. Had a lot of friends live down the beach, but our whole team was here on campus.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I always ask because I wonder if anyone listening, you might live in the houses or live in the dorms, so a cool connection, definitely.
Yeah. 105 townhouse was great because we were right on the baseball field. We would sit right on our front porch and watch some baseball games and heckle some of the visiting outfielders and have a nice beverage or two, and had a lot of fun watching the games in the spring.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I want to get into your career journey. I know you mentioned you had an internship, so how did you get into your professional career?
Yeah, great question. So I was here on campus, living and working here, or living and going to school here, and my brother actually worked for a credit card bank and had a couple inroads to an internship, and I got a couple interviews. It was a bank, but they had a very small sports division, so they had about 20-person division that worked in sports and managed sports credit cards. So they were the official credit card of Major League Baseball and all the teams and the NFL and all the different sports leagues and teams. So it's kind of the credit card. You see the team logo on it. They called it Affinity Credit Cards. And for me, it was an internship. It was a paid internship. I think back then, those were few and far between. So it was nice to get a job in New York City. The company was based in Delaware, but it was a small office in New York City. And I was able to touch sports and work on sports. So I didn't know that's where my career would lead, but it was a good way in to work for a financial institution and yet touch sports and be on the sports marketing side of the house. And I learned a lot. And I developed a lot of relationships with all the teams and leagues in the top 4 pro sports. So those relationships have lasted for 20 plus years. So it was a great opportunity to get an internship there. And then it went well enough where they decided to hire me right after I graduated college. So I knew, I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. I probably had about 4 or 5 months left in college. I was in January, February or so when I found out I was getting a full-time job. So it relieved a lot of stress for me as I was wrapping up my senior year, knowing I had a job as soon as I graduated. And then, I was lucky enough to work in sports, but kind of on the back end of sports within a financial institution. Yeah,
that's really nice that you got a job like that right out of college. And like foreshadows what you've been doing your whole life too, which that's great.
Yeah, it was great. It opened a lot of doors for me. It was a great company. The company was called MBNA. It was an old credit card bank that was acquired by Bank of America years later. But it was a great foot in the door in the industry and get to meet a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. So what happened next? How did you progress?
Yeah, so from there, I took a similar job. So I was there about 4 years, and then I took a similar job with GE. So General Electric, they had a financial services department called GE Money. It's changed names a couple times over the years, but they were doing the same thing. They were looking to get into the sports credit card market, and they were a little indecisive what they wanted to do, but they were trying to build their team. So they were looking for someone with a few years' experience to come on board, and I made a change, and it was the right change for me at the time. I think I was getting a little stale at my old role and looking for something new, and was living in Manhattan, commuting up to Stamford, Connecticut, not too far from here, and doing the reverse commute for a while. So that was a great opportunity to really start a business within a larger organization. GE is one of the biggest companies in the world, and I was able to help start a new business within their sports division. Turns out a couple of years into that, they decided not to go that route, and they kind of decided. So I looked at it as another opportunity, as a stepping stone to go make another change in my career. So I did about 2.5, maybe 3 years at GE, learned a lot. It was an eye-opening experience working for a big company like that and learning a lot of different aspects of what they do everything from making microwaves to making credit cards and everything in between. So, it's a big company and learned a lot. And then from there, I really made a transition to fully sports. I went to Octagon Sports Agency, which is a Connecticut-based sports agency based down in Norwalk, and one of the biggest sports agencies in the world. And I only went there for about a year, but I learned a ton. And for me, it was to get fully engulfed in the sports world. And after starting on the financial services side and working for banks and financial institutions, it was great for me to go kind of fully sports. And that's really what triggered the next 10 years or 15 years of my career. So got to learn a lot. I worked on the NFL business for Octagon. Their one of the bigger clients they had was MasterCard and MasterCard. So it was a kind of transition from financial services to sports, but which is probably why they hired me in the first place. But yeah. I worked on the MasterCard account across their NFL business. So really great for me to interact at a sports agency that was big and popular. They do everything from representing athletes to representing brands from a consulting perspective. So learned a lot about the industry and was able to re-engage with a lot of different NFL teams who I had worked with previously.
Yeah, that's something we talked a lot about with agencies. Like at the Bloomberg meeting, we talked a lot about working for agencies and how that's really good for young people starting their careers because you get to work with those accounts and like make connections, which, yeah, that's cool that you had that.
Yeah, so, Octagon as a sports consulting agency, first and foremost, like I said, they're athlete representation as well. They do a lot of different things and events, and they put on events and stuff like that. But they touch some of the biggest brands in the world. And, from BMW and MasterCard and Home Depot and companies like that are big advertisers in sports, and they spend a lot of their advertising budget around sports. So they do a lot of consulting, help them put on events, make sure their brand is represented the right way, sign the proper athletes to represent their brand, to be influencers, et cetera. So, like I said, it was a lot of different touch points within the sports industry that really educated me a lot, and I learned a lot while I was there for sure. Yeah,
great. And we're just going to go through your timeline. So what was next after that?
Yeah, so from there, then I made probably my most important move, and I went to Major League Baseball. So Octagon was great. It was about a year. I realized, though, that wasn't for me. I didn't want to be on the agency side. I was probably 27 or so and trying to learn a little bit where I wanted to go in my career. And I made a move to Major League Baseball, of which I really then spent the next 14 years in some capacity. So at MLB, I was working on the sponsorship group and working in media and sponsorship. And my first year or two, I was managing clients at a national level. So think about the Anheuser-Busch's of the world and the MasterCards of the world, Bank of America, all the big advertisers in sports, and especially with Major League Baseball at the time. And I would manage those relationships, manage the client relationship. And then after about 2 years of doing that, I made a move over to sales and started working on the sales side of the house. So bringing in new business, bringing in new advertisers for both media and sponsorship across Major League Baseball. So, like I said, I spent really the first 9 years of those 14 working on baseball and working on within the sport of baseball. And then in a unique partnership, the last 5 years, I ended up working on the NHL business. NHL and MLB came to an agreement on their sponsorship and media rights. And I oversaw that team and kind of gave me a good opportunity to step into a leadership position. So after about 9 years working my way up through MLB and kind of as an individual contributor and then maybe managing a small team towards the end there, I ended up stepping into this role at the NHL and managing a pretty big team and learning the ins and outs of running a business and learning how to manage P&L and manage staff and manage different departments of people. And that was as instrumental as anything in my career, those 5 years. And plus, being a hockey person, as we talked about, and not being a hockey guy, I got to work on the NHL business for 5 years and really live and breathe hockey every day and from the business side of things. And I learned a lot from the business side and was a passionate fan already, so that helps. I think
That's
you
great.
don't need to be passionate about what you do, but it always helps. So being lucky enough to work in sports my whole career, I've always been passionate about sports. And I think those 5 years, I'm going to look back probably 20 years from now and say those are the best 5 years of my career, working on something that I was so passionate about and loved so much.
Yeah, that's so nice.
Yeah.
Did those leadership skills come naturally to you, or was it kind of tough for you to step into something like that?
Yeah, I think they come naturally to athletes, right? I think
Right.
I always talk about that. When I'm hiring for different roles, athletes are always towards the top of the list. And by default, sometimes you want them to be because you want those that can thrive under pressure and those that can work in a team environment. But I think being an athlete your whole life, it trains you to work well with others and trains you to manage people, et cetera. So, I was a management major here at Fairfield, so I definitely learned some of the basics back then. Fast forward, I guess 10, 12 years or so when I started managing bigger teams. I think some of it came natural, but you learn on the go. And I think that first role I had at Major League Baseball representing the NHL really was a big learning curve for me to how to manage people the right way and manage those relationships with those under you and try to be a friend, but also try to be a boss, and then finding that mix. It's never easy. And I think you've got to, reach back to a lot of different experiences throughout your life to figure out the best mix of how to do that. But
Right.
I like to think that I've always been a good boss as far as being a friend, but I think the tougher parts of being a boss are when you can't be a friend and you've got to be that manager and that leader and make tough decisions, whether that's moving people around an organization or letting people go from a job. That's some of the hardest things you do in your career. You have personal relationships with people, and you have to make the right decisions for the business. So, I think from my background of being a management major here at Fairfield and learning, the ins and outs of how to manage teams definitely helped. And then I think throughout your career, you pick up things as you go, and you have different managers and different mentors as you go, and you kind of blend your own brand, if you will. You take all the things you like from other people and maybe some of the things you don't like from other people, and not to do that. And as you develop your career more and more, you end up coming up with your own management style or your management brand, if you will. So it took me a while. I think early on I had some bumps in the road for sure, and then with every opportunity there is to lead, you kind of learn from your past experiences.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. It's definitely, leadership can be hard, and it's definitely a balance. It's definitely a nice balance you got to find, but you work through experience, which it's cool.
Yeah, and I think with, a lot of people get put into leadership positions that aren't ready to be leaders. And I think, and that's okay. You have to learn at some point. But I was lucky enough where I think I was ready to lead when I was put in that first leadership position. And I think, I still had to learn a lot as I went, but I think I was ready. So I think when I think about my role as a leader now and as I manage different teams throughout my career, I want to develop those leadership skills so when I do put those people in, and think about the sports analogy, when you put them in the game, they got to be ready and they got to be ready to perform. So I think that's key. And like I said, you learn those lessons along the way from different managers and mentors you have.
Right. And what was working for the MLB and NHL overall as a company? Like, what was the culture like, and what was that like for you to work for such an important brand like that?
Yeah, it was different. MLB had a very unique culture when I was there. It's changed a lot over the years. They probably kind of had to change over the years, but it was a very much work hard, play hard. We had a lot of fun. We were a relatively young organization, a young team. So I was on the media side of MLB. It was a company called MLB Advanced Media. So rewind about 10 years, Major League Baseball split up 3 different ways. It was MLB Network, which is the television station, and then MLB Advanced Media, which oversaw all digital properties and all media rights. And then MLB Properties, which is kind of the league office that manages the on-field play, corporate contracts, things like that. So at the time, we were pretty segregated as far as 3 different companies. And MLB Advanced Media had a reputation, I would say, to have a really fun culture. We had a really, like I said, work hard, play hard. We were a social group. We spent a lot of time together. I probably had 12 people at my wedding from that job, right? So some lifelong friends and mentors, if you will. but the culture was great, and that matters. When you're working at an organization, you want to be happy. I've been at some jobs where I didn't like the culture, and I wasn't that happy. But I think that MLB culture was really fun, and really, it wasn't for everyone. Like I said, it was work hard, play hard. You had to be willing to work hard. But if you did, you got rewarded, and you had fun along the way. At the end of the day, we always joked around. We said, we work in sports. You might want to wake up every morning and not go to work, but there's a million people that want your job. So
Totally.
Don't take it for granted, right? And I think I've been lucky and privileged enough to work in sports, which is a passion point, and it's a passion play where a lot of people they say they want to work in sports because they love sports, but they don't know what that means. So I've been lucky enough to do that, and I try not to take that for granted. And then as we went, so the NHL partnership actually ended up being kind of sold or traded, if you will, to keep the sports analogies. Disney acquired the business from MLB, and I went over to work at Disney, and that's a very different culture than MLB was. So of those 5 years working in the NHL business, I guess about 2.5 were I was technically a Disney employee, and that culture wasn't for me, and that's fine. It's a big corporate culture. It's very different. It wasn't they're a sports company in a lot of ways. Disney, they own ESPN, and there's a big sports company, but the department, if you will, that I was working in was not that sports culture. It was more corporate culture. And so we struggled. My whole team, we struggled a little bit with the culture of the company. We had our own culture within our team, which was great. We had about 12 of us that worked on the NHL business, and that culture was amazing because it led from the previous culture at MLB. But when we intertwined and intermingled with the rest of the Disney culture, we struggled a little bit, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And like I said, culture is something that's important at a company, and every company has their own, and it's not going to be for everyone. And I think for me, I realized that Disney wasn't a long-term play for me. As far as after that role kind of expired, I knew I wasn't going to stay there. But there's 3 people on my team that did stay there, and they're still there, and they're thriving, and they're happy. So I think culture is important. I think it's got to be the right fit for you. And as an individual, as a leader, you can kind of develop your own culture sometimes, but you got to oblige with the company culture as well.
Yeah, that's interesting to see the shift. And it was kind of like you just got thrown into a shift. You had to, and even keeping your own team from the last company, you could see the differences, which is really interesting. I feel like it's very relatable too, that people get thrown into different companies and things like conglomerize, so it's interesting. Yeah,
it was interesting because it was an acquisition, and it was an acquisition we knew was coming, so there was an agreement in place. It was a very unique business transaction, but right. It really allowed, so Disney acquired the media and the MLB Advanced Media side of MLB to launch what is now Disney Plus and ESPN Plus, right? So their direct-to-consumer business was the most important part of their future of their company, and you can see now, a few years later, it is the biggest part of their company. So they acquired the company for a reason. We were, trade chips within that transaction, if you will, and we made the transition with them, with the company, but we were a smaller part of that. We weren't as much of a priority all of a sudden. So we knew we had a contract that was expiring in 5 years, and we kind of rode the contract out and then went our separate ways.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what was next after that?
So after that, I went to DraftKings. I spent about 2 years at DraftKings leading up their brand partnerships and sponsorship business. So it was a really unique experience for me. It was, a company that is still, it's only about, 12 years old now. When I got there, it was probably about 9 years old, and ran and felt like a startup, right? So it was a new industry. So even though the company was 9 years old, the industry was still brand new because it shifted from being a fantasy sports product to a sports betting product. And sports betting was getting legalized across multiple states as we went there. So when I started there, I think it was only legal in about 16 states. And when I left, it was about 30, if I can remember correctly. So it was a growing business and ever-changing business. And my role there was I led a team of 12 different sellers across the country who brought in money and sponsorship around mostly the fantasy product, not really the sports betting product, but all the different ways that DraftKings did media and sponsorship. So it was a lot of digital media, some podcast media. So we ran about 23 or 24 podcasts throughout the country, mostly sports podcasts. And our job was to bring in partners along with the podcast as well as advertising. So, we touched a lot of different things. We did events, we did podcasts, we did digital media, we did sponsorship. It was a really fun, exciting job. It didn't work out long term for me. I was only there about 2 years, but really don't have a lot of bad things to say about the company. The company's still growing. I like to see it. And I made a change a few months ago. So I'm about 3 months into my new role here at Next League, which is a little different for me. So I've kind of always been in sports media and sports sponsorship. This is sports tech. So they're still a sports company. They focus on technology for teams and leagues. So a lot of my role is to go and partner with these different teams and leagues and try to help them advance their business through the eyes of technology. So whether that's building a new website or building a new app or consulting them on their tech stack and saying, hey, here's the things you can do better and how you can be more efficient and make more money. At the end of the day, they all want to make more money, right? So these teams and leagues all have a lot of money. Sports is a booming business, especially the last few years. So how do we help them make more money at the end of the day? And using technology as a way to do that. And it's a little bit of media and technology too. So I'm not fully out of the media world, but helping. In my background is obviously media, and so I'm doing a lot more media consulting, if you will, with some of these leagues and teams that need the help. And we work with some of the biggest leagues in NASCAR and NFL, and into some small startup leagues that are just getting going, like the PWHL, the Professional Women's Hockey League, and Love Volleyball, which is a new women's volleyball league just joining. It's launching next year. So a lot of in between, so a lot of big leagues and small leagues and a little bit of everything. So it's been a fun transition for me in my career for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've just got to do everything in your career. You've worked for so many different companies and touched so many different small companies, big companies, agencies, startups. And how do you feel about that you have such a holistic and how do you feel about your career overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look back, you don't know your path, right? I think we spoke about this when we first met. You don't know your path and where you're going to go. When I took my first job, you'd think that's going to be a job for your whole career. I was naive. I think the average number is something like you have 9 jobs before you're 28 or whatever the stat is. There's a stat that's something crazy that was eye-opening when I heard it. And I don't think I had that many by the time I was 28, but I had 4, I think. So, and I've had probably 3 or 4 more since. So you don't know your path. You don't know where it's going to go. I mean, every time you think you know your path, it changes. And sometimes it's your own doing, and sometimes it's other people's doing, and it's things you can control, things you can't control. I've been lucky enough to always kind of land on my feet and be at a new role that I'm really excited about, including the one I'm at now. So it's you got to be willing to pivot and willing to adjust, and you don't know where that next opportunity is around the landscape is changing so much, and media and technology and sports in general has changed so much that, we're sitting here talking on a podcast. Podcasts didn't exist, at least the way they are now, 10 years ago. And like I said, I spent a couple years of my career working in the podcast business. So digital media, live streaming didn't exist when I started my career, but now it's the biggest thing going, right? So, and you look at all, the Netflixes and Amazons of the world, and they're starting to get into sports, right? And they're starting to get into sports streaming. So it's you have to be willing to pivot because the industry is changing and pivoting around you. And if you don't, you'll fail. So I think the key is being adaptable to your circumstances and adaptable to all your surroundings. And then, as you see an opportunity, jump for it, and don't be afraid of risk. And I've taken a couple risks. I'm probably taking a risk right now. I'm at a relatively startup company now. It's about 3 years old. I think it's different than what I've done in my past, but I'm excited about it. And if it doesn't work, I'll find something else, right? At the end of the day, your career shouldn't define you, but it's an important part of your life, right? I spend more time at work than I do with my kids, which bothers me sometimes, but family is still priority number 1 to me. And if, at the end of the day, it's just a job, right? As much as I want to say it's my whole life and it's important and it's very important, don't get me wrong, but it is just a job and there's other jobs out there. So if you're not happy, you got to be willing to pivot. And if, circumstances change, you got to be willing to pivot.
Right. Yeah. That's great advice. When do you think you learned that wise advice of what you just said? You know
what? It took a while, I would say. I think I've been lucky enough, as I mentioned, to work in a passion industry, and I've always felt like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I've had the best job. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, there would still be times where I wake up in the morning and don't want to go to work, right? It's still a job, and I'm there for a reason. I'm making money. They're paying me for a reason to deliver outputs for them in some fashion, right? So you can't take it for granted. You've got to appreciate it, but at the same time, you got to realize that's not all there is. And it probably took me to getting married and having kids, to be honest. I mean, I think in my 20s, my job defined me. Right. In my early 30s, it probably started to transition to, all right, it's a job. It's an important part of my life, but it's not my whole life. And now it's still a very important part of my life. My kids are my life, and everything I do is for them, right? So as I think about what next steps I want to take in my career, it's about, all right, where's my flexibility? where are the financial ramifications, right? What's the long-term plan? What's the equity or 401k or things that set me up long-term to help my kids and help my kids pay for school and hopefully maybe send them to Fairfield U or wherever. So, when I was 28, I was trying to get my bank account as high as it possibly could because I had to pay for myself to do fun things on the weekends, right? Mm-hmm. And now that I'm 43, it's a little different. I want to make sure my kids are set up and, college is paid for and they can have everything they want and things that I didn't have growing up. So, I would say that there's no moment that it changed, but I think as you get married and start to have a family, I think that your priorities change, and they have to. They should.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then something's going to fail, either your job or your marriage. So I'll choose marriage as much as I can every day.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, it's interesting how you learn and grow and you get older and things change. And, your career definitely changes a lot, which it's interesting to see that your growth and how you become more family-oriented after you become more work-oriented when you're younger. And when you think back to Fairfield, what's something that you wish you kind of knew more? Or do you think you should have prioritized family more back then? Or what's something you wish you knew more when you were at Fairfield?
No, I wouldn't say family because, college years, you're having fun. I mean, I think there's a handful of good friends that met their significant other while in school, and good for them, and they got married young and had families young, etc. I was the opposite. I'd say I wasn't thinking about family when I was in school. I was thinking about learning and having fun and playing hockey and having fun. Mm-hmm. Like I said it a couple times, but that was a big part of my college experience. And I think looking back and things I maybe would have done, knowing what I know now, where my career went, Fairfield didn't have a strong sports presence within the business school or the College of Arts and Sciences. I didn't know about the jobs in sports. I didn't know about the business of sports. I knew what being an athlete was. I knew also by the time I was here that I wasn't going to be a professional one, right? So I wish I knew a little bit more about the business of sports while I was in college. And I think Fairfield's made a lot of strides since then. About the business of media and the business of sponsorship and the business of sports, et cetera. But I think while I was here, that a lot of those classes and a lot of those, those sessions didn't exist. So hindsight, I would have learned a lot more about the business and been a little more prepared coming out of college for the business of sport. Mm-hmm. But, like I said, I still can't complain. I've had I had a great journey. It's been a great journey so far, and I'm probably only halfway through, which is kind of scary to think I'm only halfway through, but I'm sure my career is going to change a lot as we go forward here the next 20 years too. So
yeah, I bet. And what about something personally that you wish you knew too?
Oh, great question. I think knowing that it's okay to fail, right? I think you get so nervous coming out of college. You want to get a job. You think your career is going to define you as soon. When you graduate, you don't know what's next, right? And you think your career is going to define you, and it doesn't. And I thought it did when I was 22 years old coming out of school. And like I said earlier, I was lucky enough to kind of have a job with a few months left in college. I didn't have to stress about finding one as soon as I graduated, which I know a lot of my friends did, and a lot of students do now. And I do a lot of mentoring and helping with younger kids coming out of Fairfield, and I know that's a struggle for a lot of students. And that ebbs and flows with the economy. But for me, really understanding that it's okay to fail and knowing that your first job is most likely not going to be your job for your whole career. And it's okay to learn something, realize it is for you or it's not for you. I was lucky. I kind of learned it was for me, but not the company I was at. I knew I wasn't going to be there for my whole career, but I knew I was finding my path. Mm-hmm. So I did learn a lot at that first job. But even if I took a first job that was a totally different industry, it's still good to learn a corporate culture and learn what it's like to have a job and to have people relying on you and earn that paycheck. As I mentioned earlier, they're paying you for a reason. They're paying you to get some output out of you. And I think coming out of college, you kind of don't think that way sometimes. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm responsible for doing something, and I've got to make sure I earn my keep here. As I look back, it's okay to fail, I think is a good message. And don't be scared of failure, because that's where you learn. That's where the best learning experiences come from failure. And that's probably something you learn. I learned as an athlete. It's okay to lose a game. It's okay to lose a battle. It's okay to lose whatever it may be. For hockey, we talk about battling all the time. If you lose the puck in the corner, it's okay. Make up for it the next play. If you lose a game, it's okay. Make up for it the next game. Unfortunately, my freshman year, we didn't make up for many losses, like I mentioned earlier. But failure is okay. It's how you get up and how you respond is kind of what defines you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to conclude. It was very full circle. We started with hockey, we ended with hockey.
Yeah.
Great theme.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always been a theme of my life, so that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's so inspiring to hear your career journey and every way it took you. It's great.
Yeah.
You learn so much, and to hear your reflection too. It's great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the time. I wish you nothing but the best of luck